Today's show is sponsored by Megaport. Are you looking for an easier way to connect all your clouds that you're using? With Megaport's Network as a Service platform, you can spin up private connectivity to as many clouds as you want, anywhere in the world in minutes, not months. All the world's top cloud service providers, such as AWS, Azure, Google, are already on the network and at your fingertips. And it's all software defined, no hardware necessary. Just point, click, and connect. So if you're looking for a way to improve network performance and security, lower cloud cost, and turn up hybrid cloud and multi-cloud connections quickly and easily, Megaport is the cloud connectivity solution for you. Learn more at megaport.com. That's megaport.com. Reimagine connectivity.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. As we record this, it is almost AWS reInvent time, which that of course means AWS themed news this week. Some big announcements, both from AWS as well as some competitors that we'll be speaking about. And also for everyone here in the United States, it is Thanksgiving holiday. So no matter where you are in the world, please take care of your family, take care of your friends. Make sure you take some time out and take care of yourself as well. And with that, we're going to jump right in. Our first story this week is actually from Cloudflare. And as somebody who's kind of been on the vendor side before, AWS reInvent was always kind of a weird beast for us because if you wanted to announce a product, because of the size of reInvent, a lot of times you just couldn't announce it at the show anymore. So then it became, when do you announce it? And how do you get that out? And how do you stand out in the crowd? And Cloudflare, did a really good job of that. And they continue to go, I'll say full stack. They had something called Pages, which was generally available back in April. And what Pages was, if you're not familiar with it, was static pages and the ability to be a very developer-friendly way to implement pages. So even tied straight into Git, for instance. This takes that and takes that kind of a step further because they also had something called Workers. And Workers was their serverless platform. And some creative folks were taking Pages and taking Workers and kind of tying them together. Well, now everything is integrated. And that's what I mean by the full stack here. So this ability to take pages and then do serverless functions in those pages as well. So seamlessly building some really, really cool things. And of course, how does this relate to AWS? Well, they're starting to kind of chip away because what they're really approaching here is more and more how do we get into the compute space as Cloudflare? So really good offering for them and certainly look for more from them in the future. For our second article, Amazon CEO Adam Selipsky had really kind of made a pretty interesting announcement this week. He really came out and said, hey, we want to do something a little differently. And what if we were to build cloud services targeted for industry and industry verticals, such as healthcare or automotive or manufacturing or fintech, just to name a few. And this is interesting for me in a couple different directions. Number one, when you take something over, you don't want to rock the boat too bad. But you do want to do something maybe a little bit different than your predecessor did. And Jassy, in the role previously, was famously very anti-specialization, even to go so far as to, for a long time, be against the government cloud and kind of a separate cloud specifically for the government sector. But Microsoft and Alphabet or Google, keeping them honest here, they are already rolling out cloud packages for certain sectors. Microsoft is going after healthcare and retail and even space. And this idea is nothing new. But I think at the hyperscaler level, it's been more about building broad foundations over time. And Amazon certainly is a prime example of that. And so now they might be going into more industry and vertical specifics. Now, this strategy certainly has a certain amount of challenges to it. A shift to something like this, well, what does that mean? It means you have to segment out your efforts. You only have so many engineers, you only have so much budget. Even a company as big as Amazon, you risk spreading yourself maybe too thin and might divert some of the focus away as well. But it is a direction they do want to go in to continue to differentiate, but also to make sure Google and Microsoft don't get an edge there. And they also mentioned something, I'll close on this. As an example, they said there's something out there called Amazon Connect, which I was not familiar with, but it is a call center program that is built on top of AWS Cloud Services, but it is a very specialized application. And this may be something that they will be building and going into in the future. And they use that as an example. So looking forward to more from this space. It'll be interesting to see what they target and in what way they target it going forward. And who knows, we may hear more at reInvent coming up. For our last news article this week, wanted to talk about the JEDI contract. If you're not familiar with that, very large contract for the U.S. government. It's been going on for years now. $10 billion contract. It was the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, or JEDI contract. Originally, Microsoft won it, then AWS put up a big stink about it, and then it just spiraled out of control from there. And so it got canceled because there were so many legal challenges. And honestly, I just think this was one of those it's a $10 billion contract. It was just too big not to fight over. So now what they did is they introduced the JWCC, Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability Contract. Now, this one feels a little bit more like a compromise and a little bit more of everyone gets a trophy. The statement in the contract was basically, if you qualify, you get a piece of the contract. And so because of that, Oracle, Google, Azure, and AWS all put their names in. Initial sources have said it looks like only Microsoft and AWS actually qualify. So who knows what that means? There might be a kind of a catch-up phase for some of these others. Interestingly enough, IBM actually did not participate, and they participated in JEDI and then dropped out. And Google did not participate in JEDI. They listed some concerns out, but they decided to participate this time as well. So really interesting to see certain players in, certain players out, and how they ultimately, unfortunately, years later are still trying to resolve getting, here in the United States, the government basically all in on public cloud. But how do they do that? Who gets the pieces? Who gets what? We'll see. I don't think we've heard the last of this. And with that, we're going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Right after the break, we're going to be talking about serverless databases with Jim Walker from Cockroach Labs.
Today's show is brought to you by CBT Nuggets. You know how much we value ongoing education on the Cloudcast. And CBT Nuggets is exactly what Aaron and I wish we had when we were trying to get our certification early in our careers. CBT Nuggets is all about bringing a personalized touch to learning about cloud computing, virtualization, networking, DevOps, and much, much more. Whether it's their hands-on labs with personalized coaching or the online chat functions that come up with every instructor-led course, CBT Nuggets' team of experts is always there to help you get the most from your training and your path to certification. You can check it all out at cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast and sign up for a free trial. You get access to the full catalog of great training, including virtual labs, quizzes, and other premium features completely free for the first 7 days. That's cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And Aaron, we get to talk about serverless, man. We haven't talked about serverless in a long time. How you been?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, and it's so funny. Serverless, we were really big on it for a while, and then we kind of went off of it for a while and went on to other topics. But just like everything else in our industry, everything comes back around.
Yeah. So today we're gonna kind of dive into a different aspect of serverless, which I think is going to be kind of fun. We've talked a lot about the compute side of it, but we're going to get to talk a little bit about some of the backing services. And when we do that, we always say let's go find some folks that really know this stuff. So very excited to have Jim Walker, who is Principal Product Evangelist at CockroachDB. Jim, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Brian and Aaron.
So let's, before we dive into serverless stuff, which I think is going to be good for us, because like we said, we haven't scratched that itch in a little while. Give us a little bit of your background. We were talking about some of the places we've got connections before we started recording, but give us a little bit about your background and then kind of where your focus is these days over at Cockroach Labs.
Yeah, so y'all, I started my career a long time ago as a developer, and I love coding, and I still do. I try to, at least. I don't find much time for it much these days, but I became a marketer at about 7 or 8 years after coding because I got really frustrated with salespeople. Honestly, they would every time they open up their mouth, they would add 4 months of scope to a project, and I was always the one having to come in and kind of clarify things. So I just ended up being the person that was able to explain kind of deep technical concepts. And so I've spent my career, really a large part of my career, as a product marketer, and always in emerging tech. If it was I was in security. I've been in data really for the last 15 or so years, but always in startups. And so this is my 10th startup in a row here at Cockroach Labs. And my job here has really been, taking something that's been a fairly complex topic, distributed systems and a distributed database, and defining what that means for people. That's just not simple to do. These are pretty advanced topics. And so, taking these things and describing them in ways that mere mortals can actually understand them is what I love to do. And serverless is definitely one of those things I am now interested in as well.
Yeah, no, that's actually awesome. We when this show publishes, the one that came out before it was really talking about people getting into the sort of technical part of marketing and why it's not just fluffy words on a page. So I'm glad you kind of reinforced some of the stuff we talked about. Give us a quick, for folks that don't know Cockroach, because Cockroach is a very interesting, unique architecture around databases. We covered it a little bit maybe a year and a half ago, but give folks kind of the quick and dirty of what unique thing Cockroach does from a database perspective, and before we dive into serverless.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I love answering that question. Y'all, the first time I saw Cockroach database, I couldn't unsee it. And this is just one of those things that the closer and closer you get to distributed systems and to really kind of the advantages of cloud infrastructure, you start to see the differences between the old way and the new way. I first saw this. I was at a company called CoreOS. We were talking about that, Brian. I was VP of marketing there, and our CEO wanted to demonstrate Kubernetes to people, and he was looking for an application that was kind of built with the same design principles as Kubernetes, right? Scalable, easy to scale, right? Resilient, always on. And he knew Spencer, who's the founder of Cockroach Labs, and the application they used to show off Kubernetes, this is like 4 or 5 years ago, was this database. And I really couldn't believe what I was looking at. It was, if I think about kind of where systems are going, and if you really believe that, even our legacy workloads will migrate to the cloud, well, to take advantage of that infrastructure, I just don't think legacy databases were built for this new world. I don't think it's lift and shift. I don't think you can move and improve. I don't think it's like, let's take one piece of the stack and make it distributed, because I think the true kind of evolution into kind of fully like cloud infrastructure takes kind of really a re-architecture, a rethinking. And that is what this database is. It's also got a great name. You really can't forget Cockroach Database, right? It's a relational SQL database built for the cloud and, scalable across the planet, great in a single data center, highly resilient, and it's pretty unique.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing you can't kill.
There you go. Exactly.
And a name you can't forget, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. So Jim, we've covered serverless quite a bit on this show. And as Brian mentioned in the intro, mainly focused on compute services. But just like everything, like in the origin of containers, for instance, right? It was always all about containers, but then it was like, okay, how does this relate to data services, and how are we going to start to store everything, and how are we going to really do some of the back end things? And so, another growing trend we're seeing now is paying attention to the back end. And so, can you give us some background on what's really driving these new capabilities these days in serverless?
Yeah, so funny enough, I mean, when you all started off talking, you were like, yeah, we were into serverless, then we kind of got out of it. We're into it. I never bought into it. And I never bought into it because it just seemed too obtuse. Like I didn't understand kind of how it was all going to actually work out, right? And the more and more I've become familiar with serverless over the past really year and a half, we started building CockroachDB serverless about a year and a half ago. The more and more I became a believer. And it was really kind of understanding what the challenges are of data in a serverless world, because I think that's the part of serverless that gets really complicated. Because look, serverless means I don't want to a developer, it just means I don't ever want to have to deal with the server. That sounds awesome, right? Like I never have to deal with operations again. Fantastic, right? Like who's not going to do that, right? But to like companies who want to use serverless, the value prop is basically like, man, if I can like reduce my cloud consumption down to the least possible, that's fantastic, right? So, I mean, it has this promise. It has a promise of elastic scale. I could scale up and scale down, and I'm only going to pay for what I use, right? I'm not going to pay for things that go dormant. It's going to be always on. I'm going to be able to, spin up an instance really quickly if it does lie dormant for a minute. And I think those principles are important, but when we start to apply them to various different pieces of software that are in that stack, that infrastructure stack, that's where it gets really interesting. And I think, here at Cockroach Labs, how do we take those principles and apply them to a database? Well, that's actually pretty hard to do. And I think, building on the tradition and the foundation of what Cockroach Database is, this kind of ease of scale, the bulletproof resilience, being able to tie data to a location and do it all with like a relational model. Like combining these two things together is really super, super powerful, because I think serverless is already pretty complex. Trying to deal with data and a database in that serverless world really, really adds a whole lot of complexity when you start using legacy type things. So, using these similar kind of paradigms together is great. Yeah. The cool thing about uptime, go on, please.
No, I think the concept of it. So, as somebody kind of, we've been around the cloud stuff for a while. Database as a service, things like RDS have been around for a while, and to a certain extent, you go, well, it doesn't feel like there's servers there. Like I don't think about, that. Like help us kind of understand the difference between what sort of people think about database as a service today, an RDS type of thing, and what this sort of next generation of what people are calling, serverless database really means. Like where are the differences? What are the sort of the breakthroughs that, are kind of pushing this forward?
Yeah, it comes down as simple as this. And, our ultimate vision of what we imagine a database can be for the developer is broken down into these simple words, a SQL API in the cloud. Look at the same way that we build against Okta, and it's there's this nice API, and everything we do at Twilio, and we code against APIs for lots of different tooling within our applications themselves. Why can't the database be the same? Right? Should I ever have to worry, even think about scale? Should I ever have to worry and ever think about resilience? And God forbid when I go global and this thing is, my database is all over the planet. Well, I tell you what, you're running into problems of latency and performance when you get to those points. And I tell you what, those are the things that hold people back. And that's the friction that's in the way for developers to just go out and build. And I think even if you have this service and it's really easy to kind of spin up, you're still dealing with the friction of the database. Managing the back end is not something that anybody wants to do. So, for us, we want to simplify it down to an API in the cloud. It's really as simple as that. Let's eliminate operations from the equation.
Yeah, and when you say sort of API in the cloud, does that sort of imply then kind of a complete life cycle of? I mean, because if I think about a database, it's I gotta I got to provision the database, but then it's, you need to back it up. You need to make it resilient. I mean, does that all just sort of come in the contract of that API then at that point where I'm not thinking about it? Or is that still something that has to be thought about somewhere in the process?
In the ultimate goal, all that just kind of goes into the background. However, if you still want to deal with those sort of things, let's give people the opportunity to do that. Right? Let's allow people to kind of manage their backup and restore, right? Let's allow people to, have these deeper configurations and, change data capture as you integrate your database with other systems. But these are traditional kind of, operations tasks that a developer, they don't want to deal with that stuff. They don't even want to think about it. They just want to code. But if you want to do those things, we're going to still give people, the opportunity to kind of do that, right? And look, this is a vision. We're in step 1 of this kind of delivery of what this is. I think, well, actually, we're probably step 2 or 3. You have to build on a database that can deliver on that promise. You can't just take a legacy database and do this, Brian. I think I think that's a critical part of the equation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that ability to, yeah, exactly. That ability to span locations is, really one of the things that put CockroachDB on the map. Now, let me ask you this, though, too, because you're bringing up an interesting concept here of, okay, if you're a developer and you just want to do API calls, and there's always been, okay, in large organizations, there's a concept of the operations team, but then there's also a lot of times, hey, a DB team, right? The DBAs that are out there as well. And you're talking about making that operations side go away. And for instance, things like backups or other things like that. How in this instance, and especially in like, hey, you're going to do backups and you want to do restores and do some of these other things, are you thinking about putting that as an API in the developer's hands, or is that something like an operations person just has a newer, faster, quicker way to do things, or the database person? Is this basically a squashing down of all of those roles into one? Or is it more the tool is now available for everyone?
I think if you want it to be, it could be, right? If I'm just some developer and I'm coding and all of a sudden, I'm on, my app gets pushed on Hacker News and I've got this huge, massive spike in traffic and oh my God, I've created the next company. I don't need to go out and buy this. I don't need to go out and hire this operations person to go deal with all these things until I have to, or until I get to that point. Let's still give those people the tools to do those jobs though. Like the ops person and the DBA for that matter, like, having a query analyzer, being able to configure, say, a cost-based optimizations and these sort of things. Those are kind of core principles. Yeah, look, man, the regular developer, they don't ever want to deal with that. Could they? Maybe, but we're going to give all the tools so that, when people do get into more complex operations, they have those. We do that today with Cockroach Database, translating those to this serverless world is an interesting model in a lot of the work that we're doing right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, it's one of these things we went through, kind of bringing it back to some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning. Like when serverless first came out, it was this idea of like, there's no ops. And then you start going, well, okay, but in reality, there's a little bit here and there, and depending on how complicated. And I think what's really been interesting is we've had these subsequent sort of other services that have come along, right? So like in the container space, we've had Fargate, we've had this new thing from Google, which is like GKE Autopilot, and they all sort of are building on these concepts, which is like we have the capability to hide so much of this stuff from developers, and there are sort of emerging use cases that come out where you go, yeah, you still may have some things where you want to go back and twiddle nerd knobs and do a bunch of stuff. But if you start thinking about this, you really start to kind of unlock some, hey, I don't have to think about that. Like the system just kind of takes care of itself. Have you started to see any either like mindset shifts or sort of use cases where people go, yeah, I'm gonna stop asking you all the time for access to, these 10 knobs that I used to have on a database? Like, are you starting to see that like we've seen in some of the other, more compute-centric services yet?
So this is relatively new to us. We haven't seen that yet, but you're exactly right, though. It's changing behavior, and there's so many things that you could do in a day.
Yeah.
And let's replace the things that were mundane and ridiculous for me to deal with those things that actually matter. And I think that's what's getting this increase in speed in the way we deliver applications, right? Like look at the way we deliver today, than how different it is than the way we did, even 5 years ago, guys. Like this is just incredible. And I think we're still doing the same amount of work. We're just focusing on different things. I look at the world of serverless as, I agree with you. It isn't the elimination of ops. It is a shift in ops to the things that actually really are going to actually matter to you, your customers, and how you deliver that application to them.
Yeah,
and Jim, how does security fit into all of this as well? What we're also seeing a lot of times is everyone kind of charges ahead, especially in new areas, containers at first and serverless at first, and everyone just wants things to work, right? And then everyone kind of comes behind later on and goes, oh, wait a second, we need to consider security. It seems like it's always an afterthought in something like this. How does that fit in or play in this model?
Yeah, it's a great question, Aaron. People run down the hill and they're like, oh my God, I can do this thing. This is awesome. It's going to eliminate everything. It's solving all my problems. That's marketing, man. It doesn't solve all your problems. You're going to use the right tool for the right workload. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like use the right tool. Like look, serverless is awesome. If you want to build an application that doesn't have super crazy, security requirements by the government and X, Y, and Z, use that thing. But you know what? For the instances where you do have that, use this same database, but in a different environment, right? Like use dedicated cloud instances at that point with VPC peering and all of the bells and whistles around security. You see what I'm saying? So I think people just learn over time, to use the right, let's use the same tool, but in different ways and different. That's what we're doing with our customers today. And I think that's actually a pretty important point, because the promise, the marketing promise, a lot of these things is it shouldn't be confused with the workload reality in which you're actually going out there and trying to deliver.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that we've learned more than anything with serverless is just it really is a mind shift. And if you kind of go into it with like you said, you sort of bring your legacy mindset or your legacy application, and you go we're gonna move and improve. I kind of like that, and it rhymes, and it's a little different than lift and shift.
Hey guys, I'm a marketer. Yeah, I got to come up with those terms, stuff, right?
But it kind of you go into it with all the sort of scars and scrapes and Band-Aids and things, and you go, yeah. Whereas I think we found, and there's a bunch of folks on that we've talked to before, the Ben Keoghs and the and others in the world who just go, look, we've adopted this serverless mindset, and yeah, it has its limitations from the previous world you lived in, but if you start to sort of make this kind of the de facto way you do things, and you just tell yourself these are the new constraints, but they're also the new opportunities. It really sort of unlocks some things, and like you said, it might not be perfect for that application that you have that's going to get a quarterly audit, and if you don't do it, it's it's $1 million fine. But it also may unlock you being able to do 10 times as much for those things that are, they're we need something fast. We need something that scales. We need it to scale down. I can't hire another ops person. I think that's the other mindset that people really have to change, is to go into it with somewhat of a fresh outlook on things.
It's a different set of questions that you have to ask of your application and your team. Yeah, it is. It's a paradigm shift, in my opinion. And I think that's what's going to be really interesting. I think another point here, Brian, honestly, and I think we're going to land in another world in serverless over the next 5 years, where actually I think it should be called infrastructureless. Serverless is interesting when you're dealing with I have this containerized application and I'm running it in Google Cloud Run, and they have all these beautiful bells and whistles and dials, and it's pretty awesome, actually. I love that thing. I think it's really cool. When you get into data, then this is what I mean by different applications and different workloads have different requirements. Data is very, very different when it comes to serverless, because you're dealing with transactions, you're dealing with latencies, you're dealing with the always on availability, right? How do I make sure that my data is always going to be there? These distributed databases do re-architect from the bottom, right? We write in triplicate across multiple places. And we're using Raft and distributed, all that stuff is actually pretty important for that context. in your simple application, it might be as simple as like you're using Google Cloud Run to manage my, and orchestrate my containerized application. It's all automatic, right? Because I think that's, it comes down to what you're trying to accomplish in that workload. For us, it's a database.
Yeah. Aaron, I think one of the things we may have to sort of queue up as a topic for probably a 2022 show is, as some of these things are becoming both the compute end and the back end services, is to figure out like, are there still split teams, right? Are there still sort of apps teams and ops teams? A lot of the folks we've talked to, the Joe Emersons of the world and all, are, sort of you build it, you run it. I think that's maybe something we want to go explore at some point is, is there an interaction for these two sort of teams? What does that look like in reality? And we may have to have Jim come back months from now when he sort of lived through some of these things with folks and give us some insight on it.
Yep. Agreed. And Jim would certainly love to do a follow-up on this and kind of do a retrospective or, as we move forward on this as well.
Yeah.
I mean, guys, there's a palpable interest in this concept. I mean, we put out a CockroachDB service. It was about 5 weeks ago. So it's less than a month, man. We have there's it's like 3,500, 3,600 clusters have been created. And we're just a small company.
Yeah.
There's interest in this, right? And it'll be interesting to see how far this goes.
That's awesome. What's been a good way to get started with this?
CockroachLabs.com, CockroachLabs.cloud. You just look up Cockroach Labs. I mean, you can't forget our name. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward, dude.
Use the Google machine. Use the
right.
tools. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Jim. Number one, great to get a chance to talk to you. It's you've got some background that sort of intersects with where we are. I think, Aaron, do you remember the first time we met the CoreOS folks and we sat there in New Orleans and we thought, why in the world would anybody want to build their own Linux? And we thought Alex and Brandon were crazy, and now we're 10 years into this thing. It's cool to see how stuff evolves.
Yep. It's funny you mentioned that. I was actually thinking about that exact same moment earlier in the show as well when we were talking about origins of CoreOS. So that's funny.
You guys, we're living in this Giphy world. I think it was Alex Polvey is the one who said that Google infrastructure for everyone else or something, right? So those guys are amazing.
Yeah, they got a lot of things right. Well, cool. Aaron, you want to wrap it up? Take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jim, thank you for your time. And for Brian and I, thank you to everyone for listening. And also, if you really want to help us with the show, tell a friend. Also, give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. If your podcast player does allow ratings as well, it certainly helps us with all the algorithms and ratings and everything that's out there. And we would certainly love your feedback as well. We're always available through Twitter or show@thecloudcast.net. And so for that, I'm going to wrap it up this week. On behalf of Brian and I, thank you everyone again for listening, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.